Welcome to the Mind
What do we really mean by genius?
Matters
Gifted brains are different.
podcast. An exploration of giftedness,
This idea of gifted and what it is and what it isn't.
twice exceptionality,
No two twice exceptional people are exactly the same.
and neurodiversity.
It's okay to be who you are.
In childhood
I like to learn about things, but I like to learn my way.
and beyond. This is Mind Matters.
Hey there, and welcome to episode 57. I'm Emily Kircher-Morris. As we're all adjusting to the new reality of quarantine and life with the coronavirus, we invited a guest to talk to us today about how to support kids who are dealing with anxiety. We're all dealing with a lot right now, and Dr. Edward Amend is going to give us some tips on how to get through things. But before that, just a reminder, we would love to connect with you on social media. You can find us on Facebook and Instagram as Mind Matters Podcast, and on Twitter, we're at Mind Matters Pod. Also, don't forget that we have our Facebook group, the Mind Matters Gifted Ed and Advocacy Group, where you can ask and answer questions from other podcast listeners. Up next,
Hi, my name is Dr. Edward Amend. I am a clinical psychologist at the Amend Group in Lexington, Kentucky. We provide comprehensive psychological, educational, and gifted services for individuals and their families.
stay where you are.
Previously on Mind Matters,
Hi there, I'm Christine Fonseca, and I'm the author of the upcoming book, The Caring Child.
What are some of the biggest changes that you see, and how do you think that's influencing the development of their emotional intelligence and empathy?
This generation of children from about 10 to college age, they are born into a world with smartphone technology. Most of us, when we were 16, we immediately went and got our driver's license, right? Kids today, average age of getting a driver's license is 22.
Wow.
With as little as 2 hours of screen time a day, we are beginning to see changes in just how the brain's being developed. That has huge consequences for how we process and regulate cognitive skills. It has huge potential consequences for our social and emotional development. It's something we're going to have to pay close attention to.
look for episode 36 wherever you get your podcasts. This is the Mind Matters Podcast.
We're here with Dr. Edward Amend, and we're going to be talking about coping with the stresses and anxieties that are being magnified by the coronavirus pandemic. Ed, thanks for being here.
I'm so happy to be here.
I think maybe a good place to start is there's this general impression that kids don't experience anxiety, or at least not much of it, because they have little to worry about. We'll talk in a minute about the difference between worry and anxiety, but for now, let's talk about some of the reasons our kids may have anxiety.
Sure, anxiety is one of those things that brings quite a few kids to my office. It comes in, many shapes and sizes. There's everything from everyday worries to more obsessive compulsive thinking tendencies or severe anxieties, fears, and phobias. Anxiety in children is vast, and there's many different ways that it presents, but it is one of the most common things we see these days, even before the events that we're all experiencing right now. Anxiety comes up in different ways for children. It may present at school and only at school in some kids. It may present at home and only at home in some cases. And I always find it interesting when parents and teachers talk together and they actually sometimes feel like they're talking about two separate kids because the child is just in such a very different state at school versus at home. And so they may, it may be that they have stomach aches or headaches, and especially the younger children who aren't able to label that anxiety. So again, it can present in lots of different ways in lots of different situations.
How is it different that anxiety presents in kids compared to adults?
Well, that's a good question, because typically we see, especially with the younger children, the more physical aspects of anxiety. They often can't label what's happening. Their reactions may be physical in the sense of stomach aches and headaches. They may be behavioral in lashing out or arguing when really there's anxiety behind that. And I think that is one of the most challenging pieces to uncover in kids, especially when they present with some of that anger and frustration that may not initially look like anxiety, but there's anxiety behind that frustration. They feel trapped, they feel pushed into a corner, and so they lash out, as opposed to being able to identify, gosh, I'm feeling really anxious right now about this particular assignment. And that, I think, is one of the main differences we see between children and adults. Adults are typically better, not always, but typically better at identifying the feelings and emotions of anxiety or worry behind the outward behaviors, whereas children have a much more difficult time doing that and really need help from adults and guidance to identify those underlying feelings.
They don't have the emotional literacy skills to verbalize those things, and they may not be aware of their own thought processes. So it looks like defiance or acting out. And sometimes I think adults tend to look at it like a discipline issue as opposed to searching for what that underlying emotion is.
Yes, and I think that can certainly happen in school situations, particularly when a teacher has 25, 30 children they must attend to it all at one time. It's not within their capability always to recognize, this child is just anxious in this situation, because they're not presenting as an anxious child. They're presenting as a child who's lashing out or acting out in some way that disrupts the process of the classroom.
What is the difference between worry and anxiety? I often have clients who come to me, whether it's their parents or the clients themselves, and they talk about having anxiety or feeling anxious, but it might not necessarily be on that clinical side. They might just be very worried about something.
Yes, I think we all have worries. Every one of us has worries about something. There are days when when some of us will check the door. Did we lock that door, or did I turn the stove off? It doesn't take up a great deal of our time, energy, or effort. It's just a passing thought. And in most cases, that's certainly a worry, but nothing that is even close to anything clinical. Then you get a step up in those worries to more significant worries about loved ones, about situations that we're living through. And I think the easiest way to start to differentiate how significant a worry is and whether it reaches that level of any type of clinical anxiety or anxiety disorder is to look at the frequency, the intensity, and the duration. How frequent are these episodes of worry? Is it, once every month I think, maybe, did I close the garage door? Or is it every day I've got to go back and double check whether I closed the garage door? The intensity, how intense is this worry? Is it that passing thought, maybe I didn't close the garage door? Or is it that nagging thought that continues throughout the course of the day, and it's just so intense that you can't focus on anything else? And then again, duration refers to how long has this been an issue? So those are the key pieces that we try to look at for differentiating whether this is a worry that we can use maybe some self-help books, some specific ideas, some relaxation apps, or other specific strategies, or something that reaches the anxiety disorder level that might need more professional or clinical intervention.
So you and I both specialize working with those gifted and 2E kids, which definitely come with just some other different layers that we need to consider. When we're talking about anxiety, what are some things to consider as it relates to gifted and twice exceptional kids specifically?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think one of the things we need to remember when we talk about gifted and twice exceptional kids is that we don't have any research that says that gifted kids or twice exceptional kids have more problems with anxiety than any other group of kids.
Right.
We know that they experience anxiety and other mental health challenges about as frequently as any other group. So considering the level of anxiety present in the world, it's not unusual for us to see quite a few gifted kids who are experiencing anxiety. First thing, I always try to remind folks that I'm a terrible person to to try to determine the frequency of anxiety in gifted kids and twice exceptional kids, because the ones that aren't experiencing anxiety don't show up at my office.
Right.
And so I have a little bit of a skewed view of the level of anxiety, but it is frequent. It is one of the most frequent reasons that kids come to my office. So when we talk about anxiety in gifted kids and adolescents and adults even, I think one of the things that we need to keep in mind is that asynchrony, that unevenness of the gifted child that can contribute to some of that anxiety. And of course, when we're talking about twice exceptional kids, that's kind of asynchrony on steroids. There are significantly gifted abilities as well as significantly delayed areas in some domain. And so that asynchrony creates some difficulty really just dealing with yourself and certainly dealing with other people in the world. And so that in and of itself can cause some of that worry, some of that anxiety, that start to feel like I'm different and I don't relate very well. So that, I think, is a piece that contributes to some of that anxiety. The other piece that I think it's important to talk about with gifted and twice exceptional kids is that word intensity. We hear that word thrown around a lot with gifted kids, and I think it very much captures the essence of these gifted kids. They are incredibly intense in some areas, and so their anxiety then becomes incredibly intense as well. They take it to very extreme levels in some cases, with being able to cognitively understand what they are going through, but not necessarily having the emotional depth and emotional understanding to be able to handle that level of anxiety. So that's where that asynchrony and that intensity tie together.
That intensity kind of is both an asset and a burden, depending on the situation.
Mm-hmm.
And like you mentioned, I feel like a lot of times kids don't have the life experience, what you're talking about, to put those worries or that anxiety into perspective. But on the other hand, sometimes if we can teach them some tools and some strategies, they might really be able to grasp those very quickly and, put them to use if they have that support and that right environment.
Right, and the life experience is very, very important. My old mentor, the late Jim Webb, used to always say that the school of experience is a hard one, but a fool will learn no other way. Mm-hmm. And I think that's it ties in with the other cliche that good judgment comes from experience. Unfortunately, experience only comes from bad judgment, or something like that. So right. It's really tricky to get that experience. And I think, speaking from a parent's role, one of the hardest things to do is to allow your child to have that experience of failure and frustration and anxiety, so that they can develop those skills. The phrase I use with parents all the time is, we know how this movie ends. We see our child experiencing that frustration or that anxiety, and we want to stop that. We want to help them, and certainly it's part of our role to do that. But there are other situations where helping them through the process of managing those milder worries and those milder anxieties, so that they can learn the skills and tools to do that, is really, really important, without feeling that need to jump in, because again, we know how that movie ends and we don't want it to be that way. So it's a balance for parents, I think, and especially when we're dealing with a situation like we are now. It's also very, very challenging to keep that balance, because we're all on edge now. We're all stressed. Right. We're in the time now of COVID-19, and everybody's kind of thinking, what do we do? How do we handle this? And nobody really knows the right way forward.
Well, just like you mentioned, none of us know how this movie ends.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're all kind of, it's hard to manage our kids' anxieties and our own anxieties.
For sure. And you're going to see, everybody's stress levels increase. Tensions are high with folks in many places sheltering in place, spending more and more, we'll put quality in air quotes there, family time together. It is challenging. There are quicker reactions, more intense reactions, and maybe even some inappropriate reactions, especially when you're dealing with a family of intense, gifted, and 2E people. Patience and acceptance are so important now to help us provide the support that we all need. And it's really easy when you're tense and stressed to want to chastise and talk about the things that are bothering you. But recognizing that everybody needs a little bit of that patience and support in the moment is so important. Again, going back to the children, not necessarily recognizing that, some of these reactions are related to the situation. They may feel justified for their wild reactions because they may think they didn't get enough, get as much ice cream as their sibling did. Mm-hmm. But, really it's the underlying anxiety of, hey, what's going to happen tomorrow that may be kind of contributing to that.
I know a lot of times with my families, that analogy of being on the airplane and the air pressure drops and, the masks come down and they say, secure your own mask before helping those that you're with so that you can kind of engage in that self-care.
Right.
And so many of us as parents have had those coping skills that we're used to using. They're unavailable to us right now. Mm-hmm. We may not be able to go and see friends. We may not be able to go to the gym. We may not be able to feel successful at our job because maybe our job has totally changed. And so then our tolerance level is lower and the kids are in this new environment and we're trying to manage all of these things. And that becomes really overwhelming.
For sure. And part of managing anxiety is about learning to tolerate and deal with ambiguity and uncertainty. And we've all been dumped with a huge dose of uncertainty and ambiguity right now. From day to day, sometimes from hour to hour, we're not exactly sure what's going to happen in our little area of the world. Fortunately, here in Kentucky, we've got our governor Andy Beshear, who's giving us calm advice, and as he says, we're all going to get through this, and we're all going to get through this together, and giving us daily updates, and it really helps. I think that helps decrease some of that ambiguity, decrease some of that uncertainty, which does help decrease that anxiety. But learning to deal with the ambiguity and learning to deal with that uncertainty is part of learning to handle anxiety. And again, yes, it becomes so much more difficult now. There's no such thing as a perfect parent anyway, but that's even more true now.
One of the things I've seen with my kids, that my clients, I say my kids, but my clients who I, that we have that connection. But I've noticed as we've continued our sessions, most of which are online now, well, all of which are online now, they seem to be mostly pretty resilient. I have a few who are really kind of struggling. What do you notice about how the kids are really handling this right now that you work with?
It's really interesting. I've kind of gotten, they kind of fall into two groups. I've actually had a couple of families that I work with who it's quite interesting and I think quite telling. When I called them up and said, hey, here's what's happening. We're shifting to these online sessions and, I hadn't seen you in a while, wanted to check in and just kind of, we're set up for this date. What do you think? And I've had a few families go, you know what? He hasn't been in school for a couple of weeks. You wouldn't believe how low his stress level is right now.
Right.
So I'm not sure we need this appointment right now.
Right.
And then of course you have the others that are inundated with information. It's typically the older children are focusing on the realities of what's happening in the world, and their anxieties are in some cases intensified because not only am I dealing with the uncertainty of where I'm going to college or where I'm going to high school, but if things are going to be calmed down by that point and when we will get back to some sense of normal. And so they are, heading toward that worst case scenario and trying to help kind of walk them back has been a challenge. So certainly there are, there are some kids who do have that resiliency, who've really kind of bounced back pretty well, and they're taking a lot of this in stride. And, hey, I'm getting more screen time. Mm-hmm. I'm staying home more often, more home cooked meals. This is not a bad thing. Mm-hmm. But so it really does vary from family to family. Each kid's just so different.
I think almost all of the kids that I've talked to, even the ones who hate school, realize that school's not all bad.
Right.
I really didn't like going, but now that I can't go,
right,
although their anxiety is down, because I do feel like a lot of times kids' anxiety is directly related to school, whether it's perfectionism or peer relationships or, whatever the case might be. And so that stress is gone, but now they're missing out on recess and seeing their friends and the things that they do like. And sometimes I do believe that there is a limit on how much Fortnite one child can play. I'm pretty sure. I think we're getting close. the kids are kind of realizing that too, that there's some value there beyond just the stress of the work.
There is a saturation point, yes, for sure. And what's interesting about you mentioned the Fortnite and the video games. One of the things that does help is that it is a way for some kids to connect with their friends who they can't see every day. My son hadn't played much Fortnite in the last I don't know. He's kind of been away from that for probably 6 months, but over the last week or so, he's re-engaged with Fortnite because he can connect with his friends.
Right.
And play Fortnite that way. And so keeping those connections up, even though it may not be in the most desirable of ways for parents, it is one of those positives. But I think you're right. One of the things that I enjoy is kind of, staying home and, just maybe watching a movie. But there's only so much of that you can do. Mm-hmm. It's like, do I have to watch a movie again? Can we not have family time tonight? Can we just all go to our separate corners? My wife to her Twitter, I'll just go play my little word games, and my son will go play FIFA, and my daughter will reconnect with her, her freshman pals, and we'll just kind of go all our separate ways. Yes, I think you're completely right. When you want to do something, it's, there's never enough time to do it. But when you're forced to do those things, it's like, wow, I can't do this anymore.
It reminds me of, this is totally off the wall, but it reminds me of that Seinfeld episode where it was the two worlds colliding. Do you remember did you ever watch Seinfeld?
I watched a little bit of Seinfeld. I was never as into it as some folks, so I can't speak intelligently too much about Seinfeld. So,
and now everybody knows that, but
there you go.
No judging, it's fine.
I figure I'll have a little bit of extra time now since I'll have a few less clients.
Yes, you have to go back and watch it.
Yes, I'll have to catch up on my Seinfeld watching. I've been meaning to for the last couple of years, in all honesty. So, but I'm not able to do, at the practice, I'm not able to do one-on-one assessment anymore. So cognitive assessments, academic assessments are really on hold right now. And so that's probably about half of my client load. So I do have a little bit of extra time on my hands now to be able to do things like this podcast and a few other things. So,
in that episode, one of the things that they're talking about is, you have this world with your work people and this world with your social people and this world with your family people.
That's going to be trouble. Jerry, don't you see this world here? This is George's sanctuary. If Susan comes into contact with this world, his worlds collide. You know what happens then?
And right now, our families are all just in this same house, and
worlds collide. What? Yeah!
Well, and the differentiation of roles, when the parents are now having to kind of monitor the work that their kids are doing school-wise, but they're also supposed to be working at home. It makes it even doubly challenging because, you've got 3 or 4 new roles that have been thrust upon you. Mm-hmm. Having that separation, having that distance is difficult.
Yeah. If parents are concerned that their kids are showing signs of anxiety, what should they watch for? What are some things that they might notice?
I think one of the first things that they're going to notice is an uptick in the questions. And I think some questioning is normal these days. Why are we doing this? What's happening again? But if you see a significant increase in the questions about what might be happening, where are things going, or the same questions continue to recur, that is something that I would say is an indication that your child is probably more anxious than normal. And again, given the situation that we're in, some increase in questions is to be expected. Some level of anxiety and stress is to be expected because, again, nobody knows what's going to happen. And so, but if you continue to see a significant jump in those questions, you may see, as I mentioned earlier, more intense reactions. Smaller stimuli will bring on a more intense reaction than it previously might have. Mm-hmm. Those kinds of things are the things that I would be looking for to see if my child is experiencing any more anxiety.
Given that most people's anxiety is a little bit elevated right now, what are some ideas that parents can use to either help their kids or even help to care for themselves? Beyond rewatching all the Seinfeld episodes or playing word games on their phones.
Right. The first,
although those are not bad ideas necessarily.
No. I think the first thing is that I want to encourage parents to be vigilant about gathering accurate information from reliable sources. We want to focus on keeping our families safe and maintain as much of a sense of normalcy as we can. As I mentioned, ambiguity and uncertainty do tend to increase anxiety, and so the more structure we can bring to the situation, the more predictability, the more clarity of expectations we can bring to the table, the more that will help everybody adjust into new routines that, again, hopefully will be temporary, and we'll be able to get back to some sense of normal relatively soon. But those are the first things: that structure to your day, have some semblance of a routine that allows that predictability to happen. So that's the first thing. The other thing is, I mentioned before that, there is no such thing as a perfect parent. And so I want parents to remember, as you talked about, taking care of themselves. A few times during the day, just take that long, slow, deep breath. I'm a big fan of the 4-4-8 pattern breathing, where you breathe in for 4 seconds, hold your breath for 4 seconds, breathe out slowly through your mouth for 8 seconds, but not on anybody. Just breathing in, breathing out, and doing that about 3 times. And it really just does help you kind of reset and refocus. But I want parents to remember to do the best that they can, recognizing that mistakes will be made. Yelling will occur. There are going to be times when your kids spend probably more time on the screen than you would like them to. And there are going to be times that you're probably going to feel guilty about not having done enough, or you're going to think that you've not done enough. In those times, try to take that step back. Try to understand that, that we are all going through this together, and that we're all going to get through this together. So structure, clarity, self-care, those are big pieces. I think another thing that adults can do in this situation, and some of the older teens as well, is to start to take a look at, what am I learning about myself in this process? And the parents can also help their younger kids do this. What am I learning about what I need from others, from myself? As we start to kind of re-emerge, how do I put those things into place in my life? And one thing I think I often forget to say, because to me it goes without saying, is don't minimize when your kids are experiencing some of this anxiety. Don't minimize it. Empathize. Mm-hmm. They need your empathy. They need to understand that you're with them. Saying things like, it's not a big deal. Don't worry about that, is probably not going to help calm their fears. But empathize with them and help them recognize, this kind of does stink right now. Mm-hmm. There's some things we don't know. And help them kind of reframe their worries.
I know a lot of schools are doing different types of online learning, mm-hmm. which has been a learning curve for them. I think just like you and I have had to adjust to this online video counseling stuff.
Right.
What suggestions or ideas do you have for those in our audience who are educators about how they can help to support students virtually? Is there anything specifically that they might be able to do?
Well, there's quite a few resources out there. And I will say, with that background in psychology and having never been an educator in the classroom, I certainly admire the work that educators do, and I could never hope to replicate it. I tell my audiences all the time when I'm speaking, it's hard enough for me to keep your attention for an hour or two. I can't even imagine doing it every day for 177 or 180 days a year. I'm probably not the best person to give, educational advice, but there are tons of resources out there from the National Association for Gifted Children and other places about educating. The Kentucky Association for Gifted Education has put a resource page together. Those things are out there for you guys to get the tools. But from the social and emotional side of things, I think the biggest piece is to recognize that what you're going through, on some level, all the kids that you're working with are going through as well. And being patient with them, being your same warm, genuine person, is important. We're all going through the shared experience, and helping them, connect on that social emotional level and supporting each other, is really, really important. So that's where I come from, is continuing to, in whatever way you can, connect those, with those relationships.
Right.
If I can just say one more quick thing, the National Association for Gifted Children is working on a tip sheet for parents to deal with the current global pandemic. So hopefully next week that'll be, or hopefully soon that'll be out on the available on the National Association for Gifted Children website, with some other tips and hopefully some links to different resources that are out there.
So, any final thoughts?
One of the things my son said to me the other day, and I'm not sure if this is original from him or this came up as part of a discussion with the classroom, but he said to me, it's really interesting to think that 20 years from now, kids are going to be missing questions on tests about what we're going through right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Ed, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today.
Thank you very much.
It's normal for all of us to feel a little uncertain right now, to have a little or a lot of increased anxiety due to the rapid changes and unknown future that we're all facing. Some of your kids might be getting along fine, relieved to have the pressures and stress of in-person school off of their plates. Others, on the other hand, might be picking up on everything that's going on around them and showing signs of increased anxiety. As parents, what should we do? My advice? Don't sweat the small stuff. All kids, anxious or not, need to know right now that they are safe. That's how we prevent long-term trauma response from the situation that we're in. If the online school is too much for your kid to handle, don't worry about it. If they're spending all day in front of a screen while you try to manage your own stuff, let it go. There'll be time to worry about that after we get through this. It all really does make you reevaluate what matters, doesn't it? I'm Emily Kircher-Morris. Thanks for listening.
There's a hole in the gray sky where the sun comes through. Baby, can't you see the patch of blue? There's a silver lining if you care to see that things aren't as dark as they sometimes seem to be. Everything changes, nothing stays the same. Everything changes, only change remains.
Thanks to Dr. Ed Amond. You should visit our episode page at mindmatterspodcast.com for links to his work. He's co-author of A Parent's Guide to Gifted Children, which is an amazing resource, and Misdiagnosis and Dual Diagnoses of Gifted Children and Adults. Also on our website, you'll find a link to NAGC's page of resources for educators and parents during COVID-19. Thanks to Sony Pictures Television for the Seinfeld clip, and thanks to you for listening. For Emily, I'm executive producer Dave Morris. Hang in there, everyone. We'll get through this together. See you next time.
Everything changes, only change remains.
Mind Matters is a production of Morris Creative Services.